The old farmhouse groaned against the October wind as the family's moving truck disappeared down the gravel road, leaving them alone with their new home and the secrets buried within its rotting walls. The realtor had mentioned the previous owners left suddenly, but the price was too good to question why. The first sign came that very night. A sound like scales dragging across wood echoed through the walls, starting in the basement and slithering upward through the house's skeleton. The father pressed his ear to the bedroom wall, convinced mice had found their way into the structure. But mice didn't make sounds like that, long, deliberate, purposeful movements that seemed to follow a pattern only something intelligent could create. The mother found the first shed skin the next morning, coiled in the kitchen sink like a translucent rope. It was massive, easily 12 feet long, with an iridescent quality that made her stomach turn. No snake that large could survive in this climate, yet here was proof of its existence. She threw it away, but by evening, another appeared in the bathtub, this one even larger. The teenage daughter was the first to see it. She woke to the sensation of something cold brushing against her ankle. In the moonlight streaming through her window, she watched in paralyzed terror as something impossible emerged from the wall itself, not through a crack or hole, but through the solid plaster as if it were water. The snake was enormous, its body thick as a man's torso, covered in scales that shifted between deep emerald and absolute black. But it was the eyes that froze her blood, ancient, intelligent, and filled with a malevolence that spoke of centuries of hatred. The creature's head swayed hypnotically as it studied her, its forked tongue tasting the air. Then it smiled. Snakes couldn't smile, yet this thing's mouth curved upward in an expression of pure evil before it melted back into the wall, leaving only the acrid smell of sulfur and decay. The family tried to rationalize what couldn't be rationalized. They called exterminators who found no evidence of any reptile. They searched for holes, cracks, any natural explanation for how something so large could move through their home undetected. But the sounds continued, growing bolder, more frequent. The snake was learning their routines, their fears, their weaknesses. It began leaving messages. Dead rats arranged in perfect spirals appeared in closets. Furniture was found moved into impossible configurations, as if something massive had coiled around and through the pieces. The temperature in certain rooms would plummet without warning, and family members would catch glimpses of something dark and serpentine in their peripheral vision, always vanishing when they turned to look directly. The father discovered the truth in the basement, hidden behind a false wall that crumbled at his touch. Inside was a shrine of sorts, bones arranged in ritualistic patterns, candles melted into grotesque shapes, and journals written in a language that hurt to look at. The final entry, written in English, told of a summoning gone wrong, of something ancient and evil called forth from dimensions where physics held no meaning. The snake wasn't just haunting their home, it was hunting them. As he read, the temperature dropped so suddenly his breath became visible. The journals crumbled to dust in his hands, and from somewhere in the walls came a sound like laughter, if laughter could be made by something that had never known joy. The lights flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness. In that darkness, he felt something massive moving around him, circling, tightening. The smell of decay filled his nostrils as scales brushed against his face. Hot breath that reeked of death whispered against his ear, and a voice that sounded like grinding bones spoke words in that same impossible language from the journals. When the lights returned, he was alone, but carved into the basement wall were symbols that seemed to writhe and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. And beneath the symbols, written in what looked suspiciously like blood, was a single word in English, chosen. Upstairs, his family slept peacefully, unaware that something had just marked them for a fate worse than death. In the walls around them, the cursed snake began to move with new purpose, its ancient hunger finally focused on its prey. The real horror was about to begin, and there would be nowhere to run from something that could travel through solid matter itself. The house settled into an ominous silence, but in that silence, something vast and evil was preparing to strike. The symbols carved into the basement wall began to glow at exactly 3:33 a.m., casting writhing shadows that danced like living things across the concrete floor. The father had tried to scrape them away, but each morning they returned deeper, more pronounced, as if the house itself was healing around the ancient marks. The snake's presence grew stronger with each passing night. It no longer bothered hiding its movements. The family would sit at dinner, trying to maintain normalcy, while the sound of something massive slithered through the walls around them. Plates would rattle on the table as the creature passed overhead, moving through the ceiling with impossible weight that should have brought the plaster crashing down. But the house held, as if it had been built specifically to contain something that defied natural laws. The mother found herself sleepwalking, waking in strange places with no memory of how she'd arrived there. Once, she came to consciousness standing in the basement, her hand pressed against the glowing symbols, her lips moving in silent recitation of words she didn't recognize. Her palm bore burn marks in the shape of serpentine scales, and for days afterward, she could taste copper and sulfur on her tongue. The teenage son began experiencing visions during his waking hours. He would be sitting in class when suddenly the walls would become transparent, revealing the snake coiled throughout the school's infrastructure like a massive parasite. Its eyes would lock onto his through the phantom walls, and he would hear its voice in his mind, speaking promises of power and knowledge that came with a price he couldn't yet comprehend. But it was the daughter who bore the brunt of the creature's attention. She had become its primary focus, its chosen vessel for whatever ancient purpose drove its existence. Every night, she would wake to find her room transformed. The walls would be covered in scales that pulsed with their own heartbeat, and the air would be thick with the musk of something primordial and wrong. The snake would emerge not just from one wall, but from all of them simultaneously, as if it existed in multiple dimensions at once. During these encounters, it would speak to her in that grinding, bone-deep voice, telling her stories of the world before humans, when things like itself ruled over reality with absolute dominion. It showed her visions of other families, other homes, other victims who had been chosen throughout the centuries. Each family had eventually succumbed, their bodies found arranged in ritualistic patterns, their faces frozen in expressions of terror so profound that investigators had been driven to madness just by looking at the crime scene photographs. The snake revealed its true nature slowly, savoring her growing horror like fine wine. It wasn't just a ghost or spirit, it was something far older and more terrible. It was a fragment of consciousness from a realm where thought became reality, where will could reshape matter itself. It had been summoned by the previous owners, desperate people who had made a bargain they couldn't possibly understand. In exchange for wealth and power, they had offered their home as an anchor point, a place where the creature could exist in the physical world. But the snake had grown hungry for more than just a dwelling place. It wanted to experience human existence, to taste mortality in fear and desperation. It fed on terror, growing stronger with each scream, each moment of absolute helplessness. And now it had found the perfect family to sustain it for decades to come. The attacks escalated beyond mere psychological torment. The father woke one morning to find his legs paralyzed, not from injury but from something far more sinister. When he looked down, he could see the faint outline of the snake coiled around his lower body, its spectral form somehow able to affect his nervous system. The paralysis lasted for hours, during which he could only lie helpless while the creature whispered threats against his family in that horrible, grinding voice. The mother began aging rapidly, her hair turning white and her skin developing deep lines seemingly overnight. She would catch glimpses of herself in mirrors and see not her own reflection, but the face of something ancient and reptilian staring back. The snake was slowly replacing her, cell by cell, memory by memory, until soon there would be nothing left of the woman she had been. But the most terrifying revelation came when the family discovered they couldn't leave. Every attempt to exit the property resulted in them somehow finding themselves back inside the house, with no memory of how they had returned. The snake had claimed not just their home, but their very existence. They were trapped in a supernatural prison with a creature that grew more powerful and more malevolent with each passing day. As the second week of their captivity began, the daughter made a horrifying discovery in her parents' bedroom. The walls were covered with cocoons made of shed snake skin, each one roughly human-sized and pulsing with internal movement. Inside each cocoon, she could make out the vague shapes of human forms, and she realized with dawning terror that these were the previous families, the other victims who had been chosen throughout the centuries. They weren't dead, they were being slowly digested, their life force drained to feed the snake's growing power while their consciousness remained trapped in an eternal nightmare of suffocation and despair. And now, As she watched in horror, a new cocoon was beginning to form around her younger brother, who stood motionless in the center of the room, his eyes rolled back to show only white. The snake's massive head emerged from the wall behind her, its ancient eyes gleaming with satisfaction as it prepared to claim its next victim. The cocoon around the younger brother pulsed with a sickening rhythm, each contraction drawing him deeper into the translucent membrane of shed scales and something far more sinister. His sister lunged forward, clawing at the rapidly hardening shell, but her fingers passed through it as if it existed in a dimension slightly removed from reality. She could see his face through the membrane, peaceful and serene, completely unaware that his life force was being slowly siphoned away to feed an ancient hunger. The snake's massive form coiled around the room's perimeter, its scales scraping against furniture that should have been crushed under its impossible weight. But physics held no meaning for this creature. It existed in the spaces between atoms, in the gaps where reality grew thin, and it could manifest its presence however it chose. Tonight, it chose to be terrifyingly, overwhelmingly real. The father burst into the room, wielding a shotgun he'd retrieved from the basement, but the pellets passed harmlessly through the creature's form before embedding themselves in the wall behind it. The snake's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass mixed with dying screams, a noise that made the family's teeth ache and their vision blur. Weapons meant for the physical world were useless against something that existed primarily in the realm of nightmares and ancient malevolence. The mother appeared in the doorway, but something was wrong with her movements. She walked with a serpentine grace, her spine undulating in ways human anatomy shouldn't allow. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that belonged to the creature, as if it was speaking through her vocal cords while she remained trapped somewhere deep inside her own body. "The transformation has begun," she said, though her lips barely moved. "Soon, you will all understand the gift we offer. Immortality through consumption. Eternal existence as part of something greater than your limited human consciousness could ever comprehend." The daughter realized with mounting horror that her mother was becoming a vessel, a human puppet through which the snake could interact more directly with the physical world. The creature was learning, adapting, finding new ways to bridge the gap between its dimension and theirs. And if it succeeded in fully possessing her mother, it would have a permanent foothold in reality that no amount of salt circles or holy water could break. The house itself began to change around them. Walls stretched and warped, corridors extending into impossible lengths that seemed to fold back on themselves. Rooms appeared that hadn't existed moments before, filled with artifacts from the snake's previous victims spanning centuries. Ancient furniture covered in dust and despair, children's toys that moved on their own, photographs of families whose faces had been scratched out by claws that left gouges in the glass itself. In one room, they found dozens of journals, each one documenting the final days of a family that had been chosen by the creature. The entries followed a predictable pattern: initial confusion, growing terror, desperate attempts to escape, and finally, resigned acceptance as the victims realized they were trapped in a supernatural web from which there was no escape. The final entries were always written in the same handwriting, regardless of who had started the journal, as if the snake itself was completing their stories. The daughter read the most recent journal with trembling hands, recognizing her own family's experience in the carefully documented descent into madness. But this journal contained additional entries, written in her own handwriting, describing events that hadn't happened yet. According to the pages, she would watch her father disappear into the walls tomorrow night, consumed by the snake's hunger. Her mother would complete her transformation within the week, becoming a perfect hybrid of human and serpent consciousness. And she herself would make a bargain with the creature, trading her soul for her family's freedom, only to discover too late that the snake's promises were lies wrapped in scales and ancient malice. The revelation that their fate was already written, already decided by forces beyond their comprehension, should have broken her spirit entirely. Instead, it ignited a desperate fury that burned away her fear. If the future was predetermined, then she would find a way to rewrite it, even if it meant confronting the creature on its own terms. She found the answer in the basement shrine, hidden beneath layers of dust and despair that had accumulated over decades of supernatural feeding. The original summoning circle was still intact, carved into the concrete floor with symbols that hurt to look at directly. But more importantly, she found the binding contract, written in a language that predated human civilization but somehow remained comprehensible to anyone desperate enough to read it. The snake wasn't just haunting their home, it was bound to it by the terms of an agreement that could theoretically be broken, if someone was willing to pay the price. The original summoners had offered their bloodline as payment, condemning their descendants to serve as the creature's food source for eternity. But contracts, even supernatural ones, contained loopholes for those clever enough to find them. As she studied the ancient text, the temperature in the basement plummeted to Arctic levels. The snake materialized behind her, its massive form filling the space between the walls and ceiling, its eyes burning with an intelligence that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. It knew what she was planning, and it was not pleased. "You think you can break what has been written in blood and starlight," the creature hissed, its voice causing the concrete walls to crack. "You are nothing but food, little mortal. Your defiance only makes you more delicious." But as the snake lunged forward to silence her permanently, she spoke the words she had found hidden in the contract's margins, words that made the creature recoil as if struck by lightning. The binding circle flared to life, trapping the snake within its confines for the first time in centuries. For a moment, she had the upper hand. But the creature's smile told her that her victory was temporary at best, and the price for her defiance would be extracted from her family in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The binding circle held for exactly 13 seconds before the ancient symbols began to crack and bleed. The snake's laughter echoed through dimensions as it slowly pushed against the supernatural constraints, its massive form rippling with power that made reality itself bend and warp around the basement. The daughter realized with dawning horror that her temporary victory had only served to anger something that had existed since before the concept of mercy was born. "Did you truly believe that mortal words could contain what your kind summoned from the spaces between stars?" the creature hissed, its voice now coming from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the very air itself. "You have only hastened your family's consumption. Now you will watch them die slowly, one by one, while you remain conscious and aware throughout eternity." The binding circle shattered completely, sending shards of supernatural energy through the house like glass grenades. Upstairs, the family felt the explosion as a wave of pure malevolence that knocked them to their knees and filled their minds with visions of their own deaths played out in excruciating detail. The snake was no longer content to feed slowly, it wanted to gorge itself on their terror before claiming their souls permanently. The father was the first to be taken. He simply vanished mid-scream, pulled into the wall by invisible coils that left only the echo of his voice and 5 finger-shaped gouges in the plaster where he had tried to claw his way back to reality. His family could hear him calling for help from somewhere inside the house's structure, his voice growing more distant and distorted until it became indistinguishable from the wind howling through spaces that shouldn't exist. The mother's transformation accelerated beyond all previous boundaries. Her spine elongated and curved, her skin took on a scaled texture that gleamed with unnatural iridescence, and her eyes became vertical slits that reflected light like polished obsidian. But the most horrifying change was in her voice. When she spoke, it was with the snake's ancient wisdom and bottomless hunger, though tears of human consciousness still leaked from her reptilian eyes. "Join us willingly," she pleaded with her remaining children, though whether the words came from her human heart or the creature's manipulation was impossible to determine. The pain of resistance is so much worse than the peace of surrender. "I can still feel myself in here, trapped and screaming, watching as this thing uses my body to hurt the people I love most." The younger brother's cocoon had nearly completed its formation, the translucent shell now opaque and pulsing with veins of dark energy that fed directly into the house's supernatural circulatory system. Through the membrane, they could see his body changing, becoming something that was neither fully human nor entirely serpent, but a hybrid abomination that would serve as the creature's avatar in the physical world. The daughter found herself alone with her transformed mother and the snake's overwhelming presence, the weight of centuries pressing down on her consciousness like a mountain of malevolent intent. The creature had grown tired of games and psychological torment, it wanted to complete its collection, to add her family to the dozens of others that had been consumed over the decades. But in her desperation, she discovered something the snake hadn't anticipated. The binding contract contained more than just the original summoning, it held fragments of the creature's true name, syllables of power that could theoretically be used to banish it back to the dimension from which it had been called. The words were scattered throughout the document, hidden in seemingly random passages, but when assembled correctly, they formed a pronunciation guide for something that predated human language. Speaking the name would require a sacrifice, however. The contract was clear about the price. Whoever spoke the banishment would take the snake's place as the guardian of the dimensional barrier, trapped forever in the spaces between realities to ensure that nothing else could cross over. It was a fate arguably worse than death, an eternity of conscious isolation in a realm where time and space held no meaning. As she prepared to speak the words that would save her family at the cost of her own existence, the snake revealed its final, most devastating truth. The creature had been manipulating events from the very beginning, orchestrating their family's arrival at the house, their discovery of the basement shrine, even her current moment of apparent heroism. It had grown bored with simple feeding and wanted to experience something new, the exquisite agony of a human soul willingly sacrificing itself for others, only to discover that the sacrifice was meaningless. "Your family is already mine," the snake whispered, its massive head materializing inches from her face. Their souls were claimed the moment they crossed the threshold. "What you see as their bodies are merely echoes, shadows of consciousness that I maintain for my own amusement. Speak your banishment, little hero. Send me back to my realm, and spend eternity knowing that you died for nothing." But as the creature spoke, she noticed something it had overlooked in its ancient arrogance. The tears falling from her mother's transformed eyes weren't just expressions of trapped humanity, they were drops of pure human essence, untainted by the snake's corruption. And those tears were falling directly onto the binding circle, reactivating symbols that had been dormant for decades. The original summoners hadn't just created a prison for the snake, they had built a trap that could be triggered by genuine human sacrifice, powered not by death but by love so pure it could burn through dimensional barriers like acid through paper. The creature's mistake was allowing her to witness her family's suffering, because that suffering had awakened something in her that transcended fear and desperation. She spoke the banishment not as a desperate gambit, but as an act of absolute love, her voice carrying harmonics that made the snake recoil in genuine terror for the first time in its existence. The words tore through reality like lightning, opening rifts in space-time that revealed the swirling chaos of the creature's home dimension. The snake fought against the pull with every ounce of its ancient power, but love proved stronger than malevolence, sacrifice more potent than hunger. As it was dragged screaming back to the spaces between stars, the house began to collapse around them, the supernatural architecture that had sustained the creature's presence crumbling into ordinary wood and plaster. In the final moments before the dimensional rift closed, she saw her family's true forms, not the corrupted shells the snake had shown her, but their actual souls, trapped in crystalline prisons that shattered as the creature's influence was severed. They fell back into their bodies like water filling empty vessels, gasping and whole and gloriously, impossibly alive. The house stood empty now, just another abandoned farmhouse with a history of tragedy that would fade into local legend. But sometimes, on nights when the wind howls through the walls, visitors claim they can still hear the echo of something vast and hungry, calling from dimensions where love has never existed and sacrifice means nothing at all. The family never spoke of what they had experienced, but they never forgot the price of their freedom, or the daughter who had paid it willingly, her consciousness now standing eternal guard against horrors that waited in the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the moments when reality grows thin and ancient hungers stir in the darkness beyond the stars. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Also, share this video with your friends, it really helps a lot. Raising hands. If I made any mistake in the video, I sincerely apologize, feel free to correct me in the comments. And let me know in the comments, what should I improve in future videos? Your feedback means a lot. Speech balloon. See you in the next one, take care and keep learning.